Welcome. My name is Heather. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm Developer Relations and Community Manager for Bitovi, and I'll just act as the moderator throughout this panel. But the real stars of the show, our panelists, are Justin Meyer. He is the CEO of Bitovi, and we have Jennifer Wadella, who is the Director of Angular Consulting for Bitovi. And today we're really talking about fostering a healthy corporate culture to lead to a higher performing team. Just kind of the things that either have been researched or real life experience. That's what we're drawing from today. And so to lead into this discussion, I want to ask both Jennifer and Justin, what does a quality company culture mean to you, and how do you create it?
So I guess I'll go first. I think culture to me, I mean, obviously it's hard to define exactly what culture is. It's that sense you get of fulfillment at a company. I think what I'm looking for in culture, in establishing culture, is generally people are productive and they enjoy and feel fulfilled. They enjoy their work.
Yeah, I would just expand on that. That's definitely the goal, but a big part of creating that quality culture comes from creating an environment of psychological safety, ensuring that you have an environment where people feel like they can bring themselves to work and do that best work, have the autonomy they need to execute well and do that in alignment with the company's vision.
Yeah. And then how have the two of you, as leaders of either teams within this company or the company as a whole, how do you work to create it? Is that an active process? Do you research it, or is it something that you kind of have a feeling about?
I think it's a little bit of everything. It's definitely something that you have to work on. So it's not something that's just going to happen magically. It's something that a lot of times needs to be driven from the top down, especially that point of creating psychological safety. I've been at companies before that had so much homogeny that they called culture, where if you weren't part of the hive mind, it was not a good place to work, and they mistook that for a good culture, when in reality it didn't let people bring their different and unique talents to the table. So it's something you need to be conscious of, and definitely make an effort to cultivate and create an appropriate environment.
Yeah. And so after doing research and taking inventory of what Jennifer and Justin have learned from their real work experiences, they boiled down like three key elements that help a company culture move from, that kind of feeling of survival to this self-organizing mode, or this way that employees feel empowered to work, ask questions, all that. And the three things were direction, technical skills, and motivation. And obviously technical skills is software development specific, but if you're from a non-software background, really what we mean by that is continued learning, and how you make sure that that's a priority in your workplace. So we'll speak to direction first. And so my first question for either of you is, if you're building a clear and organized direction for a project, it comes down to good project management skills. Justin, for you, as someone who started their own company, how do you learn good project management skills?
How does one learn, or how did I learn, are slightly different things.
Yeah, we'll go with you.
Yeah. So, well, I guess let's talk about what I think is important for project management first, and then maybe how you get there second. Like you said, it's the direction, right? It's making sure that people understand what they're trying to accomplish and the outcome and impact they're having. There's a lot of discussion these days about outcome-oriented work instead of task-based work. Instead of saying like, oh, we need to add this promotion feature. Instead, think about like, oh, we need to raise revenue 5%, or we need to encourage new user signups 4% higher. taking a step back and instead of thinking about like what task needs to be done and just like what goals are we achieving and making sure everybody agrees upon that. That's the first most essential step of direction. I think that's something that I personally learned kind of the hard way a bit. Was, Bitovi had some popular, well, relatively popular, not as popular as Angular, Jennifer, but relatively popular open source tools. And we just built, basically we just built what I thought was cool. And I'm sure a lot of people have worked for a stakeholder or a company that it's just like stakeholder just says, this is what we're building, we got to go build it. And in the beginning, I had good instincts of what people wanted. And then at some point I got into crazy, H2 push mechanisms for like server-side rendering and things that our users really didn't care about. And I wasn't thinking about outcome. I was just thinking about like, what's the next cool task to build? And, our open source tools lost like 50% year over year. And I kind of realized like, wait, we're not thinking about, we're just thinking about the next cool feature, not thinking about what we're actually trying to achieve and who we're trying to achieve it for. And that shifted me to being kind of from a technologist type person to more of what I would call like a product manager, and started going to those meetups and reading a bunch of books on it. And, ultimately realizing that like direction, a lot of times you don't need, like your direction doesn't necessarily need to be like, a lot of times people think the project management is that you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And I think it's much more provide high level goals for people and then let them fill in the details underneath that.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo a lot of what Justin said, that we notice a huge difference on in the software field is because we train our engineers to not just write code, but to think about what they're doing. Who is the user? How are they consuming this? What value is this going to bring the business? It lends to better software because they are thinking about this instead of just, putting their heads down and, trying to scramble through based on requirements. They're making sure they really understand what we're building is right. And I think this is a struggle that we see with a lot of people who use vendors who are just there to push out as many lines of code as possible versus thinking, okay, what am I actually doing here? Who is my user? How are they going to use that? And it really helps a team align and understand when they understand the business goals to be able to write better software. So it's a win-win having the skill set that leads to better outcomes all around.
Yeah, it's in our checklist actually for Bitovi is like when you one of the first things we do when we onboard to a new customer or client is ask them like what's your vision, mission, KPIs, secondary KPIs, and your strategy for accomplishing the goal. We are hired as largely in our history an engineering firm, but you'll find that what we want is successful projects. And you'll start on the engineering, but like if there's a lot of uncertainty around what you're even trying to accomplish, what's the purpose? Why are we rebuilding this web? We're spending all this money to rebuild this website. Why are we doing it? What are we trying to accomplish? And it's often not engineering for engineering's sake. It's like, oh, we want to improve conversions or SEO or whatever. Like that upfront purpose and knowing that is essential. You shouldn't do anything really until you have that squared away. And I've gone to clients and you'll be like, what is it? And they'll be like, oh, wait, we don't really have clear outcomes for what we want. And we, try to help them do our best to help them develop that.
And you guys are both big on conveying the why to your developers, right? Jennifer, you just spoke to that. I'm curious as to like what those kind of conversations look like and why you feel that that's important.
I will say, I think they're painful up front a lot of times because engineers, they just want to get in and like write code as quickly as possible, right? They want to see stuff. And so it takes some serious like coaching and self-restraint to kind of like put a pause and be like, all right, let's kind of survey the landscape, understand what's going on here. Where are we at? Where do we want to go? And what's going to be the best way to get there? And what are the things that we need to consider? So a lot of it is like getting people into this mindset of asking these questions and even thinking about these things instead of just jumping straight into write the code or use that new shiny library they've read about that they want to get a chance.
Yeah. And I think too, like direction up top, you both said, how important that is. But what about like opening channels and lines of communication for while the project's ongoing? Like what kind of things do you have in place for your developers to troubleshoot technical issues or just ask general questions? And how do you foster a work environment where people feel safe enough to ask those questions and not feel like they're going to be looked at as lesser than?
That's an interesting thing. That wasn't part of like the direction, experience, motivation, but it is. I think that like because Jennifer brought it up in the beginning, like feeling safe in your work helps you. I forgot the name of the book like a long time ago. Like the Challenger disaster that happened. It was because people didn't. Basically people knew the problems, but it couldn't percolate out past kind of middle management. That's a real problem of people kind of knowing boots on the ground. People know what the problem is, and if they don't feel safe and secure bringing it up, there's going to be, it's a good recipe for disaster. A lot of software development is risk management and just trying to make sure you're like going in the right direction. And you need people when they feel like, wait, this is wrong, to kind of to bring the ship back on course. The way that, at least at Bitovi internally, we do it is, I mean, it's just one of the first things we establish in terms of like our value and culture is being able to, do the right thing, like I've had this conversation with, over and over with the executive team at Bitovi. It's like, hey, stuff becomes stratified where like, this person had a problem, and sometimes like they'll talk to not their direct report, they'll talk to someone else, they'll talk to me, and I've had senior people at Bitovi be like, oh, they should have talked to me first, and I think that's really dangerous, trying to establish those like people have their reports, but one thing at least I've tried to establish is that like it is very open. People should be able to kind of like share whatever they have at any level. It can be more appropriate and nice to give your team or your direct report a heads up, but that's just, I don't know. Like, I think that comes largely from the top, unfortunately. I don't know if that's like it's just like you have to have the from the top down, the management structures all being like, it's okay. Like, open, tell us whatever you need. Also, safety and mistakes too, I think is really important. But I'm sure Jennifer could talk better about that.
I mean, like you don't run across many technical CEOs that are as brilliant as Justin, but also good at fostering a culture where it's okay to not be brilliant at everything. So, a big part of onboarding is talking, hey, we'd really love you to ask questions. We have a great collective knowledge here. Like, we'd rather you ask somebody who might have some knowledge that you might not have instead of like spinning cycles on it for hours and hours and hours. And so that kind of culture set does have to come from the top. And I think Justin's done a really great job establishing that throughout Bitovi, where we have an Ask Help channel and people pop in there all the time. We are our roots are in JavaScript, but every so often we'll get sandbagged by some random PHP setup, and we can always pop in and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. Just some Bitovian can help me out of this weird extraneous situation that I don't encounter my skill set, and normally we can get an answer there. So having a leadership team that promotes that safeness of asking questions and almost that preference of, we would rather you ask and get that information quickly, I think is important. And then the other note that Justin kind of touched on is, being aware of power dynamics that are in place. There are some things that are just going to be a part of the way we operate as humans when you directly report to somebody, that you may not be comfortable addressing an issue with your direct supervisor if the issue is with that supervisor. And so Batovi has a lot of communication channels. Justin always makes himself very available to our employees. Our operations director, Paula, same thing. So we can kind of tell our people, hey, if you have something that you need to bring up, here are all these different avenues beyond just your director that you could go for some sort of resolution. And so I think not enforcing that, but making that aware that that's an option is really, really important.
Yeah. And Paul just brought up a really good point in the comment. And Paul is a Batovian as well, but he said there's nothing that kills momentum on a project like someone floundering to solve something by themselves. And it's true, to build an efficient team, you have to create channels for open communication.
I think retros can do that too. They're often, I think, like the most important, Scrum Agile meeting that any team can have is just that conversation where you sit back and you discuss what improvements could be made and kind of like whether things are working or not. That automatically puts everybody in a position to share critiques. And I'm Tuckman stages of group dynamics. I finally remember the name. The forming, norming, storming, performing. Wiki it, Google search it if you don't know what I'm talking about. But in order to like get people feeling comfortable to share suggested improvements with their team, also they need to feel like comfortable and safe and secure in their job and what they do. And that can be hard to get there. Like Tuckman stages of group dynamics is all about like people act very polite and won't say, oh, this thing is being screwed up in the beginning. And then they get to this point where like they can be sometimes like combative, as like one person says something like, oh, you fix that. Oh, I need to fix this and you need to do that. And they can kind of like spiral out of control and create like a bad situation. But the best teams are ones where, like Jennifer could tell me I'm like doing shit at something, and I'd be like, yeah, I screwed that up. And we both trust each other and know that we're working hard at the same goals. Building that team is very hard to do, but retros are a good way of like edging towards that. It's one of the first things I try to establish on any project that I'm on, if it doesn't exist already. And sometimes I've been on clients where it's like many years, they've never had a retro and they never even have that kind of conversation where you can like talk about way to improve things. And that's a real kind of social emotional challenge to like get people to open up so they don't like jump straight into like, I have 15 years of baggage and you're going to hear about it. To remind them they're on the same team, kind of build up like, hey, we have camaraderie, keep it very polite in the beginning, leak out little bits of, hey, we need to improve this. Oh, we've successfully improved things. Everybody acknowledges it's better now. And then you can work the team towards that. Like high functioning teams, retros are just like, they can name call. I mean, not like call names, but they can be just like, Fred, why did it go down? But we all love Fred, so Fred will be like, I messed up, and be like, yeah, don't do that again. Fred's like, I'm not. Let's figure out a way to do it better. That's the goal, and I think retros are a good way to edge towards foster a dynamic where people can give feedback.
Yeah. And I want to move on to the technical skills portion just for the sake of time. But I want everybody in the audience to know that one of the resources that you're going to be getting post-webinar is actually like a full 6-part series on roles, goals, and expectations, which has a full section on retrospectives and the value, especially the social emotional value of those. So awesome tie in there. So in terms of technical skills, Batovians are very active in developer communities, and they always seem to be really up to date on the latest tech trends. And I'm curious about whether you two think you've cultivated an environment for your devs to do that, or you think it's a matter of hiring the right people to do that.
I can jump on this, and you might have to like cut me off because I will talk about how to foster this all day long. I think a big part of it, my approach comes from my background as a conference speaker, and I know Justin has spent amount of time doing that as well. But one of the first things that I do when kind of building a team is to get them out of the mindset of what, like, just not feeling like they're good enough. And so one of the really great things you can do to encourage technical skill set growth is, when your team is going about their daily workflow and they get blocked by a problem, coach them into turning that into a presentation when they work through it. Or there's some peripheral, maybe there's some like API within the framework they're working in that they're just not very familiar with it. Hey, go really learn it, go do a deep dive on it and turn around and present it. And so this does two different things. When you are having to think about a presentation, you have to go much more in depth than you might just on a project. So we have a lot of engineers that they have a business goal, they have requirements, they are just trying to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible, and they're going to make up for that knowledge however they can. This is when we get into a lot of Stack Overflow copy pasting code, is because, all right, it's a problem, like here's some code. I'm not going to think about what I'm doing or the problem that I'm solving. I'm just trying to get this solved as quickly as possible. When we shift that mindset from just executing to getting into a presentation and learning format, to even begin to communicate about what that fix is, regardless of whether we pull it from Stack Overflow or not, we have to think, all right, what are the pieces coming together here? Why are they working? How am I explaining this? What are the key pieces of terminology I need to use to communicate this? And so simply by learning to present this information back, it is such a huge way to upskill a team. And you get a double benefit out of it. You have the team member themselves that is establishing themselves as a subject matter expert on this, whether they realize it or not, but then you're also educating the rest of the team. And so that's a really great continued learning practice. And when you set up something like a weekly guild meeting, a weekly code and tell, a weekly office hours, where you can facilitate really low pressure presentations like this does not need to be more than 5 minutes of a presentation, which is pretty unintimidating to most people. That's something really, really powerful that you can do, and goes a long way towards cultivating this continued learning culture, and giving people not only more skills and more expertise, but confidence in their own ability to learn things.
Yeah, I think those Bitovi monthly meetups are awesome. Justin, do you have stuff to add to that?
Mostly that I don't think I've figured it out yet, especially post COVID. But Bitovi, we would hire people and then put them in like a 2-week training, and then that would be in person, and typically with like me personally giving the training. As Bitovi's grown, and with COVID, we kind of stopped doing that. And I don't know what, I have thoughts and some programs that we're trying to do at Bitovi to get people the training they want. But the hard part for us, and I'm sure this is for a lot of companies, is I can talk through the problems of getting people adequate training, and the solutions I think are trickier because like funding it and the financial side of it, is that training is, I think, while we're a remote company, I still like training in person. It feels so much more engaging when you're there meeting with someone. You can look over their shoulder, type with them. They feel like they can more ask you questions, and especially for you just started at a company like Bitovi, it's nice to get that in-person training. But that means how do you now? Bitovi used to be just like one technology, just CanJS and that. Now we're all different types of tech, and it's hard to have any one person be able to train all of those people at one time. It just can't happen. We have too much diversity. So the other problem is, you do want it right in the beginning. Someone starts, you want the training right then to make them feel comfortable, bring them up to speed. The best idea I have right now is Bitovi's looking to have someone be kind of responsible for training, and they will work with our different departments and have kind of a cycle of every 6 months, the same training is going to happen, and any new people are going to be put in that training, and then there's going to be an advanced one every year, something like that, so we catch people all at the right time, and it probably we might have to do it remote. We might fly people in. It's more geographically diverse. Training's all it is training is very expensive for a company, but it's like insanely valuable to have people all, especially for a consulting company, consistently skilled and kind of know the right practices. So it is a challenge, I think, for most companies to figure out like how they train their employees. Maybe because we're consultancy, a lot of companies just don't do it. That they just expect to hire the people and they kind of learn on the job, which is fine. And maybe it's just because we're a consultancy, like we have to have we can't allow for that as much. Someone's going to go be billable, like they have to know. We have to make sure they know what they're doing at a client. So yeah, training's super important. You want your team to be skilled. And I think the other thing I would add is, and that Batovi is going to change, is we used to just be technical training. We found that giving people a more well-rounded training, taking your front-end engineer and teaching them like project management is really beneficial, so that they understand like how to integrate with those other teams that they're doing front end work, but they know what effective project management looks like, and know what effective design looks like, know what the back end dev is going to have to do to some extent. They're going to be much more effective at the job.
I love that. And that dovetails really nicely into how you promote people skills among your team, right? Not just an emphasis on the technical stuff, but also more of those, speaking skills and all of that. And so like, how do you encourage that? And why do you think that's important to encourage?
Yeah. For my team, I do two different things. The presentations ties really well into this because people get comfortable presenting technical solutions to a group of people. And, when we are weighing different approaches in software, we need to be able to effectively communicate why we think one pathway might be better than another. A lot of the conflict that you see on teams is people have differing technical opinions and feelings can get hurt, and all sorts of things. So having the skills to even communicate and verbalize what you think a good approach is and why you think a good approach is key. One of the other things I ask my team members to do is write blog posts, because similarly to presenting, it's still that skill of, hey, I'm trying a different communication medium to convey something of importance, be it, writing technical documentation, be it writing whether something is a best practice or not, or kind of like advice to follow. So those are ways that I help train my team. In addition, like Justin mentioned, Batovi-wide, we're considering this rotating training program, but something that I definitely struggled with was hiring great Angular developers that had no experience in consulting. And in my experience, most of the issues we run into in consulting are not related to our ability to execute technically. They are our ability to help coach clients through project management situations. There are ability to resolve differences of opinions of technical approaches. They are, dealing with all those pieces in between the actual code that we write. And so we do rotating training. Once a year, we do consulting training, which is kind of like, hey, how to effectively communicate. Let's talk about conflict resolution. Let's talk about understanding people and their motivations in the business, and how to make sure that we're aligning with what our client is looking for and delivering the most value we can. And then also on a rotating basis, we do project management training, because we walk into a lot of clients that either have no project management or bad project management, which pretty much inevitably leads to disaster no matter how brilliant your engineers are. And so equipping them with the tools to kind of walk into a situation, understand what's going on, utilize resources like retrospectives, or recommend them to kind of try and bring up approaches to work towards a better, more idealistic future. And explain to project managers why we should not be coding based on their burn down charts, because they should not be gamifying their data. Project management should facilitate better software development. Software development should not be built to give them numbers that they want. That's my mini rant.
I love it. And this might not be a question that pertains to Batovi as, a company, but it is something that the software development space is experiencing a bit now, of where companies might suffer from a lack of senior engineers or highly experienced engineers, but it is still possible to build an effective team. And Jennifer, I know you've given a talk on this that's really, really good. How do you build an effective team with, a lack of senior engineers?
Yeah, this is something we see. Everybody's trying to hire for senior engineers, but unfortunately, that pool is ever shrinking because those people ultimately end up in management or sometimes as independent consultants. And so we just are dealing with an ever shrinking pool. But then the people still in those pool are often overtasked. They are ones with the most institutional knowledge of the code base. All the hard work, the hard problems get dumped on them. And so it can create a burnout situation for the very few lead engineers you have. And because you were forcing them to do all the work instead of giving them the freedom to help educate more junior level developers on the team, you're really creating a horrible situation. So we talked a lot already about how Batovi is very pro question asking, the way we build technical teams, carving out more time for your senior engineers to spend their time mentoring, reviewing pull requests, doing those sorts of activities versus strictly shipping code is key. And this is something that has to be done at a management level or director level, because, if you put your engineers in a situation where they should be doing that, but then they're constantly fighting business on deadlines where they simply don't have that capacity to grow and educate, they might not be able to punch up for those fights. And so that's something that management and directors need to ensure they are carving that out. You can actually build that into, KPIs for your team. Be like, hey, you need to dedicate this many hours to facilitating these kind of learning opportunities. We rely really heavily on tooling like pull requests, like building custom linting tools and things like that, to try and abstract away a lot of the repeat conversations that lead engineers will have when kind of coaching younger engineers up on best practices. So we don't use PRs just for reviewing code. We use them as living documentation. Like, hey, this is how it was written before. This might be a better approach. Hey, this is the way we want the code to look like in the future. So being very, very conscious about being respectful of lead engineers' times and trying to take practices that free up their time for coaching and encouraging reviews and pair programming and things like that are really, really key. And it's hard. It's hard to have this fight with business and carve out time for it. But this is the way that you build and make up for a team that is not primarily comprised of senior engineers. Like, we have to grow our own. Boot camps can't get us there. CS degrees can't get us to where our engineers need to be. We need to be doing that work ourselves.
And then moving on towards this motivation chunk, and I think this is the meat of the conversation in terms of, so you can set direction, you can bolster people's technical skills, but where do you suss out how someone is motivated? Can you do that during a job interview process? And when I say how someone is motivated, we're really talking about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And as leaders, you guys have this challenge of figuring out how best to motivate people and how to do it effectively for a really diverse group of team members. So kind of speaking towards that extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, do you suss it out during the interview, and where do you place the emphasis?
Pulling it out in an interview is, from my experience, next to impossible. Or like, this is a really difficult question, right? Because in the ideal world, as like a CEO, I guess, I wish everybody was just purely extrinsically motivated. It'd be very easy to be like, I pay you $1 to or whatever to do this, and it would just make everything much more simple. And as like Heather had us all read this book Drive before doing this call, which talks all about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, and how the world is becoming, people are becoming, as kind of like people are becoming, generally have more stuff and able to live halfway decent lives. Their motivation moves from just like making more money to extrinsic motivational factors, that they work with a team that they like, they have a high degree of autonomy, those kind of things. So if you're, when like selecting employees, if you're looking at it like a purely like materialistic corporate sense, you probably just be like, I want the person who's gonna be extremely focused on just like doing what I'm saying this in theory, whatever like the boss thinks and whatever's going to make them the most money, that's what they're going to do, and they're going to work hard for that. But what the research and drive shows is that people who are intrinsically motivated tend to be more creative, do more interesting work, produce better results long term. So fine, then we should be focused on people who are more intrinsically motivated to do things. Now I've done that, and a lot of times the first people we've hired Bitovi who are like extremely what I would at first blush consider extrinsically motivated people. They do open source, they write blogs, they give talks. That's great. The hard part then is like, well, the job is consulting too, right? And then you ask them to do the consulting, and it's like, no, like it not going to like buckle down and like work to achieve the results of the client. So Bitovi, it's like a really, at least for me personally, it's a really hard, like you want someone who's kind of both to some degree. It's like you want someone who's, maybe it's their extrinsic reward is very much like in the long term. Like I want this, like I don't want to just like be a blogger and do open source all the time. I love that you want people who like it, but ultimately what they want is like their work to matter and like be like part of client work and successful products. Like I feel the most reward when like a site launches and it's being used by people. That's the best feeling. And you want to find people who that's their like reward mechanism that fires off. And that's hard to, I guess in my experience, I don't have any clear, like, yeah, you ask this person this question, you could just ask people like, what motivates you? Why do you want to build software? And if they're just like, I like hard technical problems, that's good. They might be very successful, like coder and technically, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to translate to be like the best consultant or software engineer, because they're not driven towards like they're not aligned with like the business goals. Basically, you want to find people whose extrinsic motivation aligns with whatever your business is doing.
Yeah. And I think kind of this is a pretty abrupt turn, but we also have to reconcile that motivation also has to be reconciled with feedback. And we get a lot of incredible feedback as Bitovians, but also we know inevitably sometimes there's hard feedback that has to be given as well. So as leaders and people who have to deliver that feedback, how do you relay constructive feedback in a way that won't, crush someone into not performing?
Jennifer hits people with a book and says, do better. That's what she's showing.
Yeah, no, so I have all like my management go-to books on the desk right behind me. But this is one of the best ones I've read in my career. It's called Thanks for the Feedback, The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback Well, even when it is off base, unfair, poorly delivered, and frankly, you're not in the mood. So I cannot encourage, anybody enough to read this book. It's fantastic. Because it talks about essentially the biology of we as humans and the way we receive and respond to feedback. So big picture is everybody prefers to receive feedback differently. So one of the most powerful things that you can do is have this conversation up front. Like if you are a manager working with your team, hey, how do you prefer to receive feedback? There are some people that they're like, hey, you need to be gentle with me. And there are other people that are like, no, you need to beat me over the head with it. Otherwise, I won't pick up on it. So kind of step number one is meeting people where they're at, because they're going to be primed that way to receive the feedback. Another book that I recommend all the time. We're just gonna. Do I have it? Okay, I don't know. I must have lent it to somebody. But my copy of Radical Candor, I think is really, really great because it talks about the importance of what the author calls radical candor, which is, making sure to not sugarcoat things or keep things from your team members, even if it is feedback, because you are going to be stifling their ability to grow. So giving the feedback consistently, giving it in a way that your team member is going to receive it the best, and giving it immediately is key. If there's some sort of feedback, this should not be coming up at a 6-month review. It should be being addressed as it happens. These are why one-on-ones are a really great mechanism for meeting with your team members, as you can discuss situations, kind of talk through, hey, like, this happened, tell me where your head's at, like, this would be my expectation for the future, what can I do to help you get there? Yeah, but I think the biggest thing is having that conversation up front, understanding how that person would like to receive that feedback, and then tailoring it to their preferred delivery.
And Justin, I'm going to throw this one at you, only because you talked. I'll call you out. You talked about this, and I think too the important thing to remember is that these two humans on this panel are very nice people, great leaders, but also nice. So I think this is something that a lot of leaders struggle with if they're kind individuals. How do you convey feedback when it has to be taken very seriously? So maybe it is something that is going to be the difference between someone having a job the next week or not. How do you tackle that? And is it something you're still working on? And
yeah, I'm bad at this. That's why you should ask Jennifer all these questions. No, I think I don't know. I don't know how to. I mean, I give feedback, but I think I mess it up in both directions at the wrong times. Like, I don't know. I generally don't. I've never yelled at anybody or anything, and maybe the hardest edge I might have in my voice is like this or something. Like, it doesn't get much. I think a lot of times people expect what's shown in movies or whatever is like diatribes with fist pounding or Succession kind of Logan Roy, like bellicose nature. And unfortunately, unfortunately, I'm not that. I forgot is it Mark Twain or somebody's or somebody like emotional intelligence or something is the right, conveying the right emotion at the right time, the right person at the right place or something like that. And I'm too the same almost always. So I do have a problem where I'll be like, this is not great, we should work to improve it. And that will come across not as strongly as it probably should. And then other times I'll be discussing, product direction or something like that. And I'll just be asking questions in what I perceive as an attempt to help shape the idea. Christopher on the React team stuff, we've done this many times where it's I'll end up coming across as hating things. I don't know. I've got enough feedback over the years, and I'm trying to work on and improve it. Maybe I need to read that book, Jennifer.
Yeah, we got 2 good book recommendations out of this.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something that it might not seem like it directly ties into motivation, but I do think it plays a big role. And it's 2 things that you both have demonstrated on this panel is the acknowledging whether it's something that is a part of your personality that it's hard to change or it takes work, or leaders can make mistakes too, and acknowledging, is that something you actively work to do as leaders, or is it just innate?
I think oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, okay. I am always in my own head, so it's innate. I think I'm constantly replaying everything that's happened, and could I have done that better? Was there something else I could have done? I don't know if that's healthy, but it does happen to me. So I think it's just innate part of my being since I was young.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could be one of those people who don't give a F. That would be awesome.
There is a book for that. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I do think a big part of this is intrinsic, where, there are the people who are self-aware and they are aware of their impact on others, and then will like replay those scenarios trying to figure out what they could have done differently, which can be a self-destructive loop to get into. I've definitely fallen prey to that, where it's like, oh man, if I had just done this better or communicated this better. But at the end of the day, that's an unrealistic expectation because we're not psychic. So I think one of the best things that you can do is, make yourself someone approachable where your team feels comfortable bringing these things to you. Like, I've definitely made mistakes early in my leadership career where I didn't see something coming and somebody just blew up and exploded on me. And I was like, wow, if I had known you felt this way, there are a lot of things that I definitely could have corrected about my behavior or my words or my actions. So having that level of introspection is key. The other part of this, and I'm going to refer back to the Thanks for the Feedback book as well, is, when we get feedback, when we feel criticized, like, there's a reason we respond to it that way. Like, early humanity, we were herd-based creatures. Like, we lived in groups. And if you were ostracized for that group for some reason, you would die. Our survival was based on being a part of these groups, and so that rejection is tied into why we have such a fear response to getting something like feedback. And so the better you can get of receiving feedback and getting away from that terror feeling and being able to kind of take that in, not let it get to a self-destructive point and say, all right, I understand this feedback. I'm going to pull the pieces that are valuable and I'm going to take this and I'm going to learn how I can be better than the next time around. That's all we can really ask of ourselves. And so getting comfortable with receiving that feedback, not getting self-destructive with it, but then putting into practice for the next time around is really key.
I love that. And I want to open the floor to questions at this point, and whether you feel most comfortable doing that by dropping them in the chat or unmuting yourself, please feel free. Yeah. Is anybody? Because I do have like a question or two more that we can tackle. Otherwise, super open to your questions. So I'll ask one more, and then please take your time to either interrupt me or to put it in the chat, either way. But we touched on this before, but I kind of want to give both of you the opportunity to drill into this a little deeper. It's about maintaining a culture of experimentation within your team or your organization. And of course, we alluded to this, but how do you, as a leader, provide space to make those, like to make mistakes or to experiment?
So I think the make mistakes part we talked about a little bit already, that like, if people are making kind of honest mistakes at Bitovi, we give them a lot of, it's, you make an honest mistake, you're not going to be fired at Bitovi. We tell this to everybody who's starting, right? Like, you accidentally delete a production database. We might talk to you for a while about that and see what the heck was going on. But if it was like, you're trying to, like, you need to learn from it and show progress. So that goes into the same idea we talked about earlier, which is people need to feel comfortable acknowledging their mistakes, acknowledging problems if you're ever gonna know about it. So you need to give people that freedom, I guess, that sense of comfort. And but what was it? Sorry, what was the other side again to that? There was
Experimentation.
That is harder. That is way harder, and something that like I've struggled with for forever as like an owner. Like especially within consulting. Like Bitovi was in some ways largely founded on we want to do experiment as like a research and development group attached to a consulting company. The financial, the financial side of it is really hard, especially as a consultancy. Every hour that we're not billable is profit lost. So it's really hard to, I envy like the Googles of the world or whatever can be like, I don't know if they still have their 20% time. I think maybe it's been moved to 10% time or something like that. to be able to structure that into people's work. Drive is filled with Atlassian, that it does, like, I think 1 day a quarter, everybody is kind of free to do an experiment that they do run their experiments overnight. And I have, I try to keep Bitovians hours in check. Would want people working all nighter once a quarter. But that is, a lot of companies do that, like provide, and it's something Bitovi's done definitely pre-COVID. We were better at this. Like, once a year, there would be a whole week we'd get together and experiment. The problems with those experiments, those 1 day experiments, is they're not sustained. And I think Drive also talked about this, that it's hard to, like, you'll do the work, but then it's like 1 day of work. What do you pick up, and what do you actually, there's typically more work that has to follow up on that. So for us, it's a hard problem that I think companies need to work through. Consultancies, people come in and on the bench, and we always have people when they go on the bench working on products and open source things. It's not as autonomous as maybe would be cool for people. I've thought about ways of, hey, you work on consulting for a certain amount of time that you basically earn strategic project time for it. I just think companies have to work through how they can finance it, and believe in it enough to, like, pull the trigger to say, we're going to spend $1 million this year on people spending their time that way, because we believe it's gonna be worth it. Not only in, like, retention, because people get to kind of work on something cool and different for a while, potentially with other people. It's worth it because they'll come up with great ideas that the company can use to improve itself, its product offering, things like that.
I will tack on real quick, because I feel like this is something that is really, really hard, and it's something I still struggle with, and have worked on, is sometimes you have to let people make mistakes even when you know they're making mistakes. And it's so hard when you have the experience and you've done things before. But we're working with software engineers who are self-discovering, who love research, who love to learn things. And so they're just going to operate differently than a lot of people. And sometimes that means they have to build their understanding by doing things the wrong way first. And as a leader, that is a very uncomfortable space to be in, because it feels like a waste of time. It feels like a waste of money. But sometimes it is the best way for people to develop the skills on their own, versus just being told, don't do that because X, Y, and Z. And similarly, like, sometimes you need to let your people take punches. I have been a fierce mama lion as a leader in the past, and tried to shelter too much. And that leads to a team that, doesn't know how to deal with conflict, who hasn't built the resiliency needed to handle difficult situations. And so sometimes you need to, I think the term right now for parenting is not be a snowplow parent, that's just trying to remove all obstacles in front of your team. You need to, like, figure out that comfort balance of letting your team do those learnings on their own, but make sure you're keeping it in check where it's not going to be a risk to the business, because this is people's livelihood, and we need to keep in mind that people want to get paid. And so finding that balance is really, really difficult to do.
But thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.